Most people never think about what lies on the ocean floor. Thousands of ships, millions of tons of cargo, and countless wrecks have remained untouched for decades. Recovering them is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Commercial salvage divers descend hundreds of feet below the surface into complete darkness, relying on little more than their equipment, their training, and a single route back to daylight. Down there are no witnesses, no quick rescue, and if something goes wrong, you're completely on your own. The 3 stories you're about to hear all come from commercial salvage divers who entered wrecks expecting an ordinary recovery operation. Instead, they found something that made them abandon the job forever. These are 3 terrifying deep-sea salvage diver horror stories. I've been a commercial salvage diver for almost 12 years. Most people think deep-sea salvage is about finding treasure. It isn't. Most of the time you're recovering shipping containers, heavy machinery, or cargo that insurance companies want back. The job is slow, methodical. Every dive is planned down to the minute, because mistakes that happen 200 feet underwater usually don't give you a second chance. This happened during a recovery operation in the Gulf of Mexico. A cargo vessel had lost several shipping containers during a hurricane. Most had already been located. Our team was hired to inspect them one by one before they could be lifted to the surface. Every diver carried a pouch filled with numbered recovery tags. The process was simple. Once you inspected a container, you clipped one of your company's tags onto the locking bar. That told the next team the container had already been cleared. Each tag had a unique number. The numbers were assigned before every dive. Mine started at 41. No one else on the vessel carried duplicates. Before entering the water, our dive supervisor repeated the same warning he always gave before wreck operations. Don't waste bottom time. If something doesn't look right, leave it. At the time, I thought he was talking about unstable cargo. I didn't realize how important those words would become. The first 2 hours underwater were completely routine. Visibility wasn't great. Maybe 6 feet on a good day. The containers were scattered across the seabed, some lying upright, others stacked on top of each other after the storm. Several had burst open after striking the ocean floor. Others were still perfectly sealed. I inspected container after container, attaching my assigned tags as I worked my way across the debris field. The current was almost non-existent. The only sounds were my own breathing and the constant hiss of air flowing through my regulator. Eventually, I reached the edge of the debris field where the containers became more isolated. That's when I stopped. About 20 feet ahead of me was another container. Hanging from its locking bar was one of our recovery tags. At first, I wasn't surprised. I assumed another diver had reached it before me. Then I swam closer. The number printed on the tag made my stomach tighten. 47. That couldn't be right. Tag 47 wasn't scheduled to be used until tomorrow's dive. Today's team had only been issued tags 41 through 46. I unclipped the tag and turned it over. It was genuine. Same plastic, same serial markings, same company logo. Even the tiny manufacturing scratch along one edge matched the tags in my own pouch. I radioed the dive supervisor. Did somebody else inspect this container earlier? There was a pause. Then he answered, "Negative. You're the first diver in that section." I looked around. Nothing but rows of containers disappearing into the darkness. No bubbles, no lights, no movement. I clipped the tag to my harness and continued. For the next few minutes, I tried convincing myself someone from a previous operation had accidentally left it behind. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. Our company had only started using that style of recovery tag 8 months earlier. The wreck hadn't been touched since the hurricane. 5 minutes later, I found another one. This one was still gently swinging with the current. It looked like it had been attached only moments earlier. I checked the number, 41. Without thinking, I reached down to my equipment pouch. Tag 41 was still clipped exactly where I'd left it. For several seconds, I simply stared at both tags, one on the container, one on my harness. Identical. Same scratches, same faded ink. I compared them side by side. If someone had copied our tags, they'd copied every tiny detail. My breathing immediately became faster. The alarm on my dive computer chirped, warning me my breathing rate had spiked. The surface heard it too. "You okay down there?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't stop looking at the duplicate tag. Finally, I said, "I think somebody else has been marking containers." The supervisor's voice became firm. "Terminate the inspection. Return to the ascent line." I didn't argue. I turned and started swimming back. As I kicked away from the container, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The duplicate tag I'd just examined was still moving, not drifting naturally with the current. It was swaying back and forth, almost as if someone had brushed past it after I'd turned away. The entire swim back felt different. Every few seconds, I stopped and looked behind me. Nothing, only stacked containers fading into darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only diver down there. Back on the support vessel, every diver emptied their equipment pouch onto the deck. Every unused recovery tag was accounted for. Not a single duplicate existed. The supervisor assumed I'd mistaken an old inspection marker left by another company. Except, our tags had only been introduced 8 months earlier. No previous operation could have used them. The next morning we returned to finish the recovery. Every mysterious tag had disappeared. Every single one, as if they had never been there. Only one remained. It had been clipped to the ship's anchor chain where none of us had gone the previous day. I swam over and removed it. Someone had scratched words into the back with a dive knife. "You missed one." I looked up so quickly that I nearly lost my regulator. The water around me was empty. Nothing moved except drifting silt. I finished that dive. It was the last wreck penetration job I ever accepted, because every time I think about that tag, I keep coming back to one question. If someone else had been inspecting those containers before us, why were they counting the ones we never reached? If you thought that story was unsettling, the next two become even more disturbing. If you're enjoying these realistic horror stories, consider subscribing. I upload new true horror stories every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Now, let's continue with story 2. I spent nearly 10 years working as a commercial salvage diver. Most people think the biggest danger is drowning. It isn't. The real danger is getting trapped. One wrong cut, one collapsed passage, one snagged air hose. Hundreds of feet below the surface, there's nobody coming to save you in time. Commercial divers are taught one rule from their very first day: never enter a space if you aren't completely sure you can get back out. This happened during a recovery operation in the North Atlantic. A cargo ship that had sunk decades earlier was finally being cleared because it had become a hazard to shipping traffic. Our job was to cut open several sealed compartments so investigators could inspect what was inside before the wreck was dismantled. By my 4th dive, I was assigned one of the lower cargo decks. The compartment had never been opened since the ship went down. According to the original blueprints, it had once been used as a maintenance storage room. Nobody expected to find anything valuable inside. The steel hatch was covered in rust and marine growth. It took me nearly 40 minutes to cut around the frame with an underwater cutting torch. The entire time I worked, visibility became worse. Every cut released another cloud of rust into the water. By the time I finished, I could barely see the torch in my own hands. I backed away from the hatch and waited. Eventually the silt began to settle. The heavy steel door slowly swung inward on its own. That wasn't unusual. Pressure differences often cause doors to move after being cut free. I waited another minute before entering. The room was completely flooded. Rows of rusted shelves lined both walls. Metal toolboxes had broken open years earlier, scattering old wrenches and pipes across the floor. Everything was covered by a thin blanket of fine gray silt. Nothing appeared disturbed. At least, not at first. I swept my light across the room one final time before moving inside. That's when I noticed something that made me stop. Footprints. Perfectly shaped boot prints pressed into the silt. Not random marks. Not damage caused by falling debris. Actual footprints. One after another, leading away from the hatch, deeper into the compartment. I stared at them for several seconds before realizing what bothered me most. The trail didn't begin at the doorway. There were no footprints entering the room, only footprints already inside. Walking farther into the wreck, I radioed the surface. "You need to see this." The dive supervisor asked what was wrong. For a moment, I couldn't even describe it. "I've got footprints." There was a long silence. Then he told me to keep the camera steady. I slowly moved my helmet so he could see them. Finally, he replied, "Document everything, but don't touch anything." Against my better judgment, I followed the trail. Each footprint was almost perfectly preserved. The farther I went, the narrower the passage became. Eventually, the prints disappeared into a maintenance corridor barely wide enough for one diver. The corridor turned sharply to the left. Beyond that, my light couldn't reach. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stop. Then my dive computer began warning me my breathing rate was climbing. The supervisor heard the alarm through my telemetry. "That's enough. Head back." I didn't argue. I turned around and started swimming toward the hatch. Halfway there, everything suddenly went dark. For a split second, I thought my helmet light had failed. Then I realized I could still see the room. It wasn't my helmet light. It was my cutting torch. I'd left it leaning beside the hatch only moments earlier. Now it was completely dead. As I reached it, I immediately saw why. The supply hose had been disconnected. Not cut, not damaged. The locking collar had been unscrewed. The hose had been carefully pulled free. Something that required deliberate effort. My stomach dropped. Nobody else from my team was underwater. Nobody should have been anywhere near that compartment. I grabbed the torch and clipped it to my harness. Just as I started toward the exit, I heard something. A dull metallic sound, like steel scraping lightly against steel. It came from somewhere inside the maintenance passage. I froze. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. I told myself it was the wreck settling. I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't convince myself. I left the compartment without looking back. The swim back to the ascent line felt longer than the entire dive. Every few seconds I stopped and turned my light toward the darkness behind me. I never saw anyone, but I never stopped feeling like something was matching my pace, just beyond the edge of my visibility. Back on the vessel, the supervisor reviewed my helmet footage with the rest of the team. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then we slowed the recording frame by frame. Just after I turned away from the maintenance passage, a second beam of light briefly swept across the far wall. Not mine. Mine was already facing the hatch. This light came from deeper inside the wreck. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it disappeared. Nobody could explain it. The compartment was never entered again. The company permanently sealed that section of the wreck and revised the recovery plan. I left commercial salvage work the following year. People always ask if the footprints were the part that frightened me the most. They weren't. It was realizing that whoever disconnected my cutting torch stood close enough to reach it, while I was less than 20 feet away, and somehow, in a place where every breath echoes through your helmet, I never heard them once. I worked as a commercial salvage diver for just over 8 years. People always ask if I was ever afraid of sharks. The truth is, sharks were never the problem. What scared every diver I knew was getting lost inside a wreck. 200 feet below the surface, visibility can disappear in seconds. Steel corridors all look the same. Every doorway looks identical. Once the silt gets disturbed, your dive light becomes almost useless. That's why every diver stays connected to the surface with a lifeline. That line isn't just for communication, it's your way home. If you lose it, you usually don't get another chance. This happened during a recovery operation off the coast of Florida. A cargo ship that sank in 1998 had finally been approved for salvage after years of legal disputes. Our company was hired to recover several expensive navigation systems from inside the vehicle deck before the wreck was dismantled. The wreck rested about 220 feet below the surface. Visibility that morning was terrible, maybe 4 feet. Before entering the water, our dive supervisor reminded us of something he'd repeated all week. If you lose the line, don't keep swimming. Stop. Think. Find your way back. At the time, it sounded like routine advice. About 20 minutes into the dive, I entered the collapsed vehicle deck through a section of the hull that had torn open during the sinking. Inside, everything looked identical. Twisted support beams, collapsed walkways, loose electrical cables drifting with the current. Old vehicles crushed beneath fallen steel. Every few feet I checked my lifeline just to reassure myself it was still running back toward daylight. The only sounds inside my helmet were my own breathing and the occasional crack of the ship settling somewhere in the darkness. After locating the first piece of equipment, I clipped a recovery sling onto it and radioed the surface. Everything was completely normal. Then I felt a tug. One pull, then another, a short pause, then 2 more. It was the standard emergency signal telling me to return immediately. I acknowledged the signal and started following my lifeline back toward the exit. At first, nothing felt unusual. The rope stayed tight. It guided me around collapsed beams exactly like it was supposed to. But after several minutes, I noticed something strange. I didn't recognize anything around me. The vehicle deck wasn't especially large. After dozens of dives through similar wrecks, I'd become good at remembering landmarks, bent staircases, collapsed trucks, cargo racks. Now, none of them looked familiar. I checked my dive computer. According to the distance I'd already swum, I should have been outside the wreck. Instead, I was still surrounded by steel. My breathing became faster. I keyed my radio. "I'm on my way back now." The dive supervisor answered immediately. "Back from where?" "The exit." Then he asked a question that instantly made my stomach tighten. "What line are you following?" I looked down. The rope disappeared into the darkness ahead of me. "My lifeline." His voice immediately changed. "No, your lifeline snapped 8 minutes ago." For a second, I honestly thought he'd made a mistake. I reached down and grabbed the rope with both hands. Then I slowly followed it with my dive light. It wasn't clipped to my harness anymore. Somehow, without me ever noticing, I'd unclipped from my own safety line. The rope I was holding wasn't leading toward open water. It was leading deeper into the wreck. I stopped moving completely. For the first time in my career, I had absolutely no idea where I was. The supervisor kept talking. "Stay calm. Don't keep moving. We're trying to guide you." But there wasn't much he could actually see. My helmet camera showed nothing except floating rust and drifting silt. Every landmark had disappeared. I forced myself to stop breathing so hard. Then I remembered something every commercial diver is taught. Your air hose always leads back toward the umbilical. I reached behind me until my glove finally found it. Using both hands, I began tracing it backward through the wreck. It wasn't easy. Several times it disappeared beneath collapsed steel. Twice I had to squeeze through spaces barely wider than my shoulders. Eventually, my hand touched frayed rope, my actual lifeline. It had snapped where it had become trapped beneath a twisted support beam. I followed the broken end until I finally recognized one of the collapsed trucks I'd passed earlier. A few minutes later, I saw the faint blue glow of daylight filtering through the torn hull. I have never been so relieved to reach open water. Back aboard the support vessel, everyone wanted to know how I'd become disconnected. I couldn't explain it. Neither could the dive supervisor. The helmet footage was reviewed over and over again. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then one of the engineers paused the recording. Just before I grabbed the wrong rope, another line slowly drifted into view from behind a collapsed bulkhead. It crossed directly over my broken lifeline. The 2 ropes touched for only a second, just long enough for me to instinctively grab the wrong one. No diver from our team had entered that section of the wreck. No recovery lines had ever been installed there. No abandoned fishing gear matched what we saw on the footage. No one could identify where the second rope came from, or where it disappeared after I let go. I never went back inside that ship. Even now, years later, there's one thing I still think about. When I first felt those emergency tug signals, I believed someone on the surface was trying to bring me home. Now, I'm not so sure, because whatever sent those signals already knew exactly where that other line ended. Those were 3 terrifying deep-sea salvage diver horror stories. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, yet we've explored only a fraction of what lies beneath its surface. For commercial salvage divers, every descent means entering places where sunlight has never reached, surrounded by wrecks that have remained undisturbed for decades. Most dives end exactly as planned. But sometimes, the greatest danger isn't the crushing depth or the failing equipment. It's realizing you may not have been the first person to enter the wreck, and you might not be the only one still inside. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, let me know in the comments which one disturbed you the most. And if you've ever worked offshore, as a commercial diver, or anywhere beneath the ocean's surface and experienced something you'll never forget, I'd love to read your story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more realistic horror stories every week. As always, thanks for listening. Stay safe.